I've had to reconcile the fact that my lifestyle has changed over the years. In fact, I might be doing the exact opposite of what I am supposed to do. Back a decade ago, when I discovered financial independence, I was getting paid more than ever, but I was spending less using frugal hacks and saving every extra penny to invest. Fast forward to 2024, and my net worth is higher than ever, yet we are making much less money than before. But but our spending has increased significantly. Of course, some of it's inflation, but not all. We eat out more, travel more extravagantly, and pay attention to our budget less. I worry about money less than ever as my lifestyle creeps forward in leaps and bounds. Am I winning the game or setting myself up for failure? Let's talk lifestyle creep. Joel Arsgaard and Matt Altmix are not only best friends, but also the dynamic duo behind the incredibly popular How to Money podcast. Since launching their brand years ago, they've not only left their previously held jobs, but also seen their own net worth grow along with that of their audience members. Today, we chat about a recent episode they recorded with their wives regarding lifestyle creep. Matt and Joel, welcome to Earn and Invest. Matt, let's start with you.
All
Is
right.
lifestyle creep a danger or a feature of learning how to money?
Oh, so you're just cutting straight to it, right? Like, I feel like this is the
Let's
question we
get
should
at it.
that we should answer at the end of the show after we've gotten all philosophical as to like where we are in life and like what is money. But I would say it is the benefit, right? Because at the end of the day, what is money if not the ability for us to direct our lives in the ways that we see that's going to bring us the most happiness, to essentially live in a way that aligns with our values. And if we can do that with some of the additional money that we've accrued, some of the money either that we're making, or maybe in your case, money that you're kind of drawing down on. I think there's some wisdom there in not being overly cheap once we've made some of these sacrifices on the front end.
Joel, Matt's got to be wrong here. I mean, lifestyle creep, it just sounds bad, right? Like, I
I
feel
mean,
like
it's we've attacked it as personal finance nerds for so long, right? So at what point and how much can you increase what you're spending on things that you care about? That's like the heart of the question for so many people, and I think so many people do overly ascribe to frugal for life mindset, right? Excuse me. And so they have a tough time being able to then finally loosen the reins a little bit to enjoy some of the things they care about. It's funny what if you could translate what Matt just said in some ways to like YOLO, right? But I don't think that's what he's getting at. And I think there's a massive difference between smart, intentional lifestyle creep in the areas that you care about and like I only live once, so let me just spend everything that comes in with no margin for error and with no thought for the future. So you certainly have to balance those things. But I do think, especially for people who listen to podcasts like this one, the typical individual who's listening to a show like this struggles with the opposite. They're struggling with they've got that 30-40% savings rate, or at least they did for a time, and they're saying, when is it okay for me maybe to dial back the percentage that I'm dishing towards the traditional retirement accounts, towards my brokerage account, towards just thinking for the of the future, and when can I start to at least enjoy some of the fruits, more of the fruits of my labor in the here and now? That is it's like a spectrum, and it's always difficult to find the right place. It's like the bouncing ball going back and forth, and you're trying to hit that spot that sweet spot in the middle, and it's always hard to figure out what that is in the moment. But I think it's worth searching for, and I think if you are too frugal for too long, and you're too future minded, you are going to miss out on some of the joys that money can bring you today in the here and now.
Matt, I feel like we can't have this conversation without talking a little bit about our own financial trajectories. Talk about how your finances have changed since the beginning of the show. You started How to Money previously under another name, what, 4 or 5, 6 years ago by now?
Yeah,
6
plus years ago at this point. That's right.
How have your finances changed? Because the conversation we're going to have is going to be a lot different when we're at the beginning of our financial trajectory than when it's moving along nicely.
Totally. Yeah. I'll answer that here in a second. I just thought of something else as far as like you're asking about lifestyle creep. And I think a part of what turns us off to that is the fact that it's got creep in it, which is like, it's a negative kind of word, whether it's
what most people call Matt.
Yeah. But even like as something creeps along, it feels like, I don't know, it doesn't feel intentional. And what Joel says something about intentionally spending. And I think that's what it comes down to, right? Because if you are intentionally spending more in an area that aligns more with your values, then it feels less like lifestyle creep as opposed to areas of life where it feels like more like an infection, where it's sort of finding its way into different parts of your life. And all of a sudden, it's like all multiple systems are shutting down now because it has found its way into other areas that hadn't been siloed. But I think that's one of the reasons why we push back against this idea of lifestyle creep. But as far as my personal sort of journey, I'll give a specific example, which is when we first started the podcast, it Kate and I made it a game almost. And at this point, we had 2 kids. They're babies. They weren't eating very much. But truly, like our motto when it came to groceries was that we could feed our family on $1 per person per meal. And so you multiply that out over the course of a month.
Wow,
And
that's not much.
It is
That's
not
not
much, but we were
much.
eating incredibly frugally, incredibly affordably, and we were eating balanced meals as well. But that is a specific area that we have dramatically increased over the years. Because I read more about health and nutrition in part. You need to make sure you're getting a wide variety of foods, including meat, which is something that we kind of skimped on early on. Like we truly saw meat as like a
The vegans just turned this podcast off now.
I used to see meat as a garnish, folks. All right, like truly for just like a little bit of flavor. Whereas now, the more I read and getting into just being healthier and stronger, it's like, oh man, we do need larger amounts of protein. Eating organic foods, that has also increased our budget. Those two things combined,
not to mention just the natural increase in the price of groceries.
Increase in prices, adding 2 more members to our family. So we now have 4 kids. So that is an area that, it used to be, I think over the past few years, we've seen our 3 years ago or 2 years ago when we first joined Costco, we were dropping something like $800 a month for our groceries. And that includes like cleaning supplies and some medicine, stuff like that. We're spending something closer to $1,600 a month now. But that is something that I'm happy to do because it's something that last night we had prime ribeyes. Like our family threw down 3 of those. They were delicious. And it was just a great family meal. And that's something that we can afford to do now a little bit more. So that's an area where we are spending certainly a good bit more.
And still much cheaper than eating out.
Oh, absolutely.
Joel, I mean, your financial circumstances have changed, right? Both of you guys were doing other jobs, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Does it feel different today to you looking at that bank account and going, maybe I can loosen up the reins a little bit?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think, and that's kind of the goal, like, because when you're talking about saving, it's really deferred spending. And so and I think that's the right way to think about savings. I think that what saddens me the most is, and I don't know if Matt agrees or not, but when I see the stories about people who worked a low-paying job for 4 or 5 decades, and then it's like, oh, they died with $8 million in their retirement account. I think to me, that's more sad than the YOLO thing. And I think that is what maybe the FIRE movement at times struggles with, is a propensity to go in that direction. It's to amass this incredible war chest. And they're giving up on certain experiences that they could participate in now, maybe meaningful trip with friends or something. I'm about to go at the end of this month on a backpacking and camping trip with some buddies. It's not terribly expensive, but my goodness, I think like sometimes early on, 10 years ago, I would have found it really difficult to have the mental ability to spend the money to go do this thing, even though I could have afforded to do that. And so I guess I know the trappings of a hyper frugal mindset and maybe what the limitations that it can impose on you. And I have slowly but surely tried to work on that. And I don't think I've gone overboard, right? Like I'm still investing, still thoughtful, still thinking about the future, still want to have a meaningful gap there. And there's certain things that just don't interest me to spend money on, like cars or fancy houses or like private island vacations. I mean, I'm still kind of a basic dude at the end of the day, but I am willing to expand in a few specific areas and have the good fortune to be able to do that thanks to a lot of years of trying to be thoughtful with my money and growing that net worth. But I do think, the typical struggle for most people, at least who listen to this, they're going to be in that I've got way more money than I know what to do with when I'm 65. And when you think about kind of with the die with zero mentality, what can I do with at least some of those funds in the here and now so that I'm well prepared for the future, but that I don't have some like way more money than I even need. That's, I don't know, thinking through that, it's always difficult and there's no easy solution, but it's worth wrestling through so that you can make sure that you're using some of those funds now for things that matter.
Yeah, I love that concept of savings is deferred spending. Matt, you mentioned food. What categories do you think lifestyle creep is a very reasonable thing in? Like, are there categories that are just too frivolous, which you'll never be able to spend money on, versus other categories where you're like, I'm thinking Ramit Sethi, like My Rich Life. I'm willing to really double down on those categories.
Yeah, no, I think it comes down to the individual. And so therefore I am not going to discriminate against anybody in whatever category that they want to spend in, as long as that they have done it intentionally, which is why, so Joel alluded, and this is the conversation him and I have had before. Joel alluded to like the janitor who has a very simple life, but that ends up dying with millions in the bank and donates it to the local library, which he was a fan of. I'm fine with that sort of scenario as long as that individual has done the work, as long as they have sat down and they have processed on their own how they want their life to look like, where they want their funds to be directed towards.
Like choosing it on purpose.
Yeah, exactly. If it's like a hoarding mentality and you're always afraid that you're not going to have enough, that's, I mean, that certainly seems unhealthy. But for an individual to want to spend more on vacations or clothing seems like something like this. Joel's wearing a t-shirt I've got on, like this Henley I bought off Amazon like 5 years ago. That's not something I really care, like that either of us I think really care about, although we do like buying
I
more
look fly. Come on.
quality goods over cheap mass-produced stuff. But if somebody wants to start spending a ton of money on clothing, that okay, that's not something I'm necessarily going to do, but I'm totally fine with that. I think for individuals to find whatever it is that floats their boat, you know, on at How to Money, we call it the craft beer equivalent, what it is that folks are spending a little extravagantly on in the here and now, while still being smart, I guess, way off in the future. So,
and everything can't be your craft beer equivalent, right? So for us, we're like, hey, pick 3 or 4 things. Like, what are those things that you're willing to spend more on than most people do? And like you're talking, we mentioned eating out and how eating out can be expensive. I think if you're doing it on purpose, that's one thing. But most people do it mindlessly, and it's like, I forgot to thaw chicken for dinner tonight, and so yeah, let's go out to eat. Or
it's convenience.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think convenience and like eating out gets, because it truly does come down to planning. And when I think more folks are seeing their category spending up in when it comes to entertainment and eating out ticking up, and it has for us as well. And that's actually one of the categories where I'm not comfortable. Like in according to our budget, that is an area where truly there has been lifestyle creep. And at the end of the year, at the end of last year, Kate and I looked at it and we're saying, why? Oh, wow, we actually spent way more in this category than we are comfortable with. It doesn't mean that we're still not prioritizing date nights at least twice a month. We can still go out and have a great time where we're talking to each other just over a beer and an affordable meal. We just don't always have to go to the nice restaurant where we're dropping hundreds of dollars with, you know, as with wine pairings and stuff like that, which there can be a temptation to do. But whether it's fancier places or just eating out more often, I think it does kind of come down to just, I don't know, the ability to proactively decide how it is that you want to live your life, which includes meals.
I think when it's on purpose, that's when that's when you derive the value from the decision. And when it's like, when it's by kind of like, forgot the plan, guess we're doing that. It's trying to hit the easy button, and the easy button is what costs you a lot of money. But if it's the date night every other week, and that's where we're willing to drop $7,500, excuse me, eating out because it's a memorable experience. Or if it's the every other week, the family thing, we go out together, and guess what it means? Because then it's no dishes. It's nobody's like, you know, there's nothing to clean up after the fact, and it creates a memorable family experience. That's a deeper reason, I think, to then do that thing and spend the extra money and find the place in your budget for it. But that's where the intentionality makes such a difference in our ability to enjoy those dollars we spend and not be like, you know, letting them drain from our life mindlessly.
Yeah, which I think a lot of folks would hear that and they would say, "Oh, you're just justifying that expense. You're talking about the dishes and not having to clean that up." And other folks out there who might be earlier on in their financial journey would say, "Just buck up, man. Like clean those dishes. Like, oh, that's family time that you can spend together as well." I'm not going to argue against that, but it's
It's also an individual decision.
Yes,
And,
yeah.
and we're all going to make different decisions individually at different points in our lives. Things that I was thinking about this just last night, how one of our listeners donates plasma, and he uses all the money that he makes from donating plasma over the course of the year to go on his vacation. And I remember at one time, like maybe like a year ago, kind of thinking, ah, man, I wouldn't do that now. But I did it in college. And there was a point in time where I was willing to do that. And there's a point in time that I'm not willing to do that.
Yeah.
And there was a point in time I'm willing to stay in hostels when I go to Europe. Now is not that time, now that I'm 40. And it's okay. I'm okay that I've expanded that. But I'm also glad I had that experience early on. So I guess
assuming, of course, that you can financially justify it, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I guess that's the point I was trying to make. You can kind of make up excuses for it. That's fine, because, like, I think even the most flimsy sort of reason can be your justification. But can you financially back that decision while continuing to achieve the different financial goals that you're looking to reach at a certain point? That's the important part too.
So Joel, I've been real intentional. Like, we jumped right into this conversation without really even defining lifestyle creep. But as I listen to our conversation, it becomes clear this idea of lifestyle creep versus being a valuist really has to do with intentionality, right? When we're intentional, it doesn't really feel like lifestyle creep. It feels like value spending. Whereas when we're being thoughtless, maybe a little bit frivolous, then it really feels like lifestyle creep. So let's just say spending growth now instead of lifestyle creep. We're going to take some of that kind of morality out of it, because hopefully a lot of us are trying to be intentional. Does spending more make us happy? So what we previously would call lifestyle creep, we're redefining as just spending growth. Does it make us happier, you think?
I think there are ways that spending more money can bring more happiness. And I don't think it's even just about experiences versus stuff. Dang it. Sorry, you're gonna have to make some edits. I think that's been the typical sort of reaction, is oh, if you're spending on experiences, that's so much more valuable than stuff. And I just don't I don't necessarily think that that's true, although I do think that prioritizing experiences can be a great return on your investment. But yeah, I guess when it comes down to it, I think valuist is the right term. But even in that, like I love the idea of like, well, did I get what I wanted for my money? Did it bring greater levels of satisfaction? And there was a new study that we just talked about recently on the show about happiness, and how it found that actually much greater levels of income do accrue to you more happiness. But what the study found was that the main reason you accrue happiness, it's the money that goes unspent. And so I think it's the greater levels of control and freedom that you have. And so for me, as long as if I'm increasing my spending, which I have been doing over the past few years, as long as I am still doing those other things, those habits, some of those frugal habits because I just enjoy them, some of the savings and investment habits because I care about greater and greater levels of financial freedom and control, and choice in my own life. If you lose those because you're spending more, that I think is when spending is going to accrue to you less happiness, because you are buying more stuff in order to probably fill some sort of like inner need. But what you're missing out on is the greater levels of control and flexibility that truly bring, I think, the most happiness, according to studies and according to my personal experience too.
Yeah, I love that dichotomy you talked about at the beginning, which was this idea of spending on things versus experience. And a lot of people are like, oh, as long as I spend on experiences, it's okay. You know, it's funny. I've evolved to thinking, well, I think like spending on things is like the lowest level of happiness. I think spending on experiences like the next level of happiness. And the final level for me is actually spending money on becoming the kind of person I want to be. So a lot of people say,
like
I
that.
want to spend money on taking a trip to Europe because that's like an experience and it's on my bucket list. And I think more about, well, I want to spend money on becoming the person who takes adventures and experiences new things and learns and grows. And I really turned it around to not even experiences, but being the kind of person who does those things that I used to think the experience was so valuable for.
That's the deeper connection,
Yeah,
I think, that we're talking about too.
I really like that.
Because it is like it's a trip to Europe that I can put on Instagram is one thing, right?
Mhm.
Then it's less fulfilling. Then like I'm the kind of person who goes and explores and sees the history of our world, and I'm walking on a road that's 1,500 years old and it's saturated in history, and I'm enjoying the small towns and the little conversations. Like that's a different perspective, even on
even if it's the exact same trip.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and so that's when it like where it comes down to the heart. But I like what you're saying, because there's a focus here on personal development, which kind of lends its way to an expense that I've recently added to my spending over the past couple of years. But like paying for an expensive gym is something I would have laughed at, because truly, there's most of the stuff that we do there. It's like,
and I still laugh at him for paying that much money for a gym. So.
I can go there. I can go home. I can chop wood. I can lift cinder block. Like these aren't things that require any sort of specialized gear or
that's the Rocky approach, buddy.
Yes. But the fact is I wasn't doing those things. And so even though I was telling myself, well, why would I spend $180 every single month to do this thing? Well, fact is, I wouldn't do it if I didn't spend that money. And I had proved to myself that I wouldn't do it, because I said that I would do it, but I wasn't. And so in my case, similar to what you're saying, Doc, is that the self-development that I'm able to experience by paying this money, and this is literally money that I'm paying it, I'm losing it, it's lost every single month. But what I'm able to gain on a personal development side of things is, oh my gosh, it's worth every single penny. And I'd pay more for it even, but I'm glad I don't have to. But
and I think the thing is, and what money people are prone to do is say, well, do the rule of 173 on your gym membership, do the rule of 173 on this and this and that. And like, yes, it's true. I could bulk up my retirement account and savings account like even bigger, and it could be more robust, and it could potentially be, yes, hundreds of thousands, if not seven figures more, decades down the road. But what am I missing out on by doing that? And if I'm planning accordingly and my savings rate is high enough and I am prioritizing future me at the same time, well, am I deprioritizing current me though, in order to amass so much that's more than I'll ever need? And that's a real risk. That is a real risk that I think is dramatically underplayed.
And not just having those additional funds on hand, but I think the bigger risk too is what you're saying, Doc, is the lack of self-development and not becoming the person that you want to become, or the person that you could be,
because you're so future.
You're so focused on that, and you're not paying attention and exercising the muscles of habit that allow you to become the person that you want to be 10, 20, 30 years from now, right? And so if that means you are not spending money once a year on a nice vacation with, say, another friend, well, that's a relationship that's suffering. That is, and you've fallen out of the habit of flexing the muscle of spending on vacation and going to the beach, or in your case, Doc, I think you go to Mexico every year. The ability to do that means that, now in your later retirement years, you're going to be able to continue to be more easily able to accomplish that, right? As opposed to having never spent all along the way, and then all of a sudden you're going to pop out of the tube at the other end, and you're going to have this ability to start dropping money on these vacations. It's highly unlikely that you will be able to do that without any other sort of diagnosis or something that all of a sudden has put your life into perspective, where you see this sort of stopwatch, the clock ticking down. That happens to some folks, and that does allow, I think, for a more radical transformation. But for most folks, it's gradual, and you gradually become the person that you are day in and day out throughout the weeks. Lead to months and years, which lead to decades, which is ultimately your entire life.
We are talking to Joel Larsgaard and Matt Altmix. They're not only best friends, but also the dynamic duo behind the incredibly popular show, How to Money. We're going to take a short break. We are discussing lifestyle creep versus spending growth. I'm Doc G, and this is the Earn and Invest podcast. All right, I'll read us back in a moment. I love where this is going, by the way. I love this conversation. Every conversation I have with you guys, I love anyway. But
well, we love it too.
This one's particularly fun, I think, because I think these are questions that we're both grappling with, right?
Yeah,
and so
totally.
it feels we're just being selfish. That's why it's fun.
and I think about our audience members who hopefully are growing with us. And I kind of said that in the intro. It's like, not only have your net worths grown, but your audience members' net worth has grown as they've been more thoughtful about these things. So they're kind of facing it right along as we are facing the same kind of questions.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let us go back then on 3, 2, 1. We are back with Joel Larsgaard and Matt Altmix from the How to Money podcast, and we are discussing lifestyle creep versus spending growth. Matt, before the break, you talked about this idea of the gym, something you normally wouldn't have spent money on, and as you've evolved and you realize this is what it works for you, and spending a little extra money on it, will make you more likely to work out. It'll add to your happiness, improve your life. But there are gyms and then there are gyms, right? You can go to the middle tier gym. You can go to the finest gym. You can hire the finest trainer. I mean, you can continue to spend more and more. How do we allow our spending to grow, but also continue to set limits when necessary? Like, how do we
Ooh.
limit set?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that for me, I tend to be the kind of person that throws myself into things. And so I would say that if I wasn't married, if I didn't have a family, if I didn't have just a number of other priorities in life, I could see myself kind of going down that path. And so for me, I think it's just having, it's not limiting, but it's having more. And what I mean by that is having more goals. It's not saying that like, no, you can't do this thing, but like it's, oh, actually open your eyes to see all these other things around you. And so what that means is not only from a financial standpoint, but from a how I spend my time standpoint, I actually don't want to spend more money working out and focusing on my health. I don't want to spend more time uh doing different training programs or whatever. You can have a whole bucket list of different things you might want to accomplish.
You're hitting the sweet spot
When it comes to fitness, but the ability to do the things that's just enough for me, but then to be able to spend my time and money elsewhere, whether that's on family, community, volunteering. I think having other outlets is so important to kind of, I don't know, broaden the appeal of spending in a more diversified way.
Joel, this conversation springs from an episode you guys did on How to Money, where you and your wives were talking. You go to the beach every summer. And at one point, one of you asked your spouse or the other spouse about enough. And I thought that was a really interesting conversation. Tell me about balancing spending growth versus worries about having enough. Because I think a lot of us, Joel, get to this place where we're so careful with our finances because we have this version or this idea of enough that also evolves over time. And spending growth threatens that. And so, do you get worried about enough? Does that come to mind a lot when you're looking at your monthly bills and saying, we've kind of increased here a little bit?
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I think that is probably where a lot of hyper frugal folks, what that stems from. And I've been honest with this on our show that when I was a kid, my parents had a lot of financial difficulties. Dad lost his job. It led to a sequence of difficult money situations in the family, including filing for bankruptcy, a car repossession, and that left an indelible mark on me. And so not having enough feels like this incredibly real fear for me, based in trauma is an overused word, so I'm not going to use that word, but based in like what happened when I was a kid. And so I think I went through a lot, especially my first decade of adulthood. And that was like my impetus for saving and investing was like, I can't let that happen. But I could let that mindset dominate me for the rest of my life. I could let the potential for scarcity, even though the numbers on the page and the reality of the trajectory don't match up with that that's off the table at this point for me when I think about it rationally. And I'm like, what's the worst that could happen? Even if Matt gets canceled in our podcast because he does something really awful and terrible, and the podcast
Highly
goes
likely
away.
to happen. Highly
Like,
You know what?
likely.
It's this. This is an inside joke, but it's the speedo of FinCon. It'll eventually get them
exactly, yes.
canceled. So
It's the speedo effect.
We're
you
never
know?
coming back from that. But like, what's really truly the worst that can happen? And the worst isn't all that bad. And so I have to, because it's really easy to catastrophize in my brain and think about worst case scenarios that aren't actually possible. And when I think about actual potential worst case scenarios, I'm like, it's really not that bad. We'll be fine. And so like that was something we talked about where Matt's wife doesn't currently work, and she's like, I could totally go back to work. Or what if our income drops? Like, that's okay. Like, we'll be fine because our lifestyle hasn't grown to the extent that we couldn't afford it if our income dropped dramatically. So like I think those are really important scenarios to run through because it's really, I get that attachment to the numbers on the page and the salve that it can bring you. But for so many people, it doesn't bring that because they haven't thought through the concept of enough, and they haven't really realized that actually where they are is better than they ever could have hoped to be when they were in their 20s or early 30s, and that the downside potential for their future is extremely limited based on the skills that they have and based on how they've been able to handle money thus far. So if that's the case, be willing to think through how you can incorporate a few more of those dollars now that are going to boost your. I remember one of the things, like, and we talked about this on the show, I think, was like, I said I would never want to like rake leaves. I raked leaves like as a kid. We had this giant yard, big trees, and raking leaves was like I hated it. And so that's one of those things I'm more than willing to pay for, is like, I will not rake the leaves in the yard. But I got out there and did some yard work yesterday, and it was great, but it wasn't raking leaves, so it's okay. So really find those things for you that are gonna make you happy without overdoing it, but also just, I guess, look at the numbers and look at the real potential downsides, and know that they're probably not as bad as you made them appear in your mind.
Yeah, and I'll say too, this might shift the conversation a little bit too, but for me, it's come down to not just feeling comfortable with having enough and seeing the number on the page and looking at the trajectory, doing some math, and realizing that, hey, we're coast fired. We don't need to invest anymore if we don't want to. We can just coast. But it also comes down to a changing view of work. And when you are seeing work as this thing that you're trying to escape, and at a certain point, truly, I want to be able to kick back and I don't want to provide any value to the world at all. Well, yeah,
Price is Right and Judge Judy every afternoon.
If that's the case, then you're not going to be earning anything else. But my view of work I don't want to say it's changed, but I think maybe early on, first having come across financial independence, there is more of a desire to be able to say, I'm going to kick it to the curb. But the more I work, the more I realize this is how I contribute to society. This is how I'm able to make the world a better place. And I want to continue to do that, whether that's with the podcast, with How to Money, or just some other thing I haven't even thought of. I think that I will continue to work, and I don't know, maybe you've heard of this too. I forget who it was that came up with this, but there's like a new acronym. So you've got FIRE, of course, that everybody knows, but then there's ICE. Have you heard about this? Have you?
No, what's ICE now?
It stands for I'll continue earning.
Yeah,
which is, I don't think it's going to catch. I don't know. It's not that catchy. But when I heard that, I thought, you know what? That's exactly the sort of mindset, the frame of mind that I think I'm going to enter into, is that I'm not necessarily looking to completely retire. I'm going to look to find ways to contribute to continue to provide value to the world, in which case you will be financially compensated, maybe not at the same levels, but knowing that there will still most likely be a paycheck coming in. I think that's a really healthy way of thinking about it.
Yeah, Joe, let me make an intellectual jump here, because when I take what you both say together, Joel, your point is you can't save yourself to enough, right? Because there's narrative trauma, generational trauma, there's issues from growing up, and enough really isn't about how much you save. You know this from your own experience.
Yeah.
Yet when I'm listening to Matt, it's almost like, too, you can't really spend yourself to enough either, because we know ultimately from getting to the point where we don't need to work anymore, you still end up earning maybe that whole ICE phenomena, because you have greater gifts to give to the world. You have this sense of purpose, this thing to do. So it's funny because it's almost like it's not about saving, but it's not about spending growth either. It's, again, maybe we're just coming back to this valuist, using your money to become the person you want to be.
Yeah, we talk about the why behind your money, and we're not the only people who talk about that, but we actually have like a 2-page thing on our site where you can kind of answer some questions, and it's almost like the Myers-Briggs or whatever for your money or something like that, not nearly as in-depth, although I don't know if that's even, I think some people have cast aspersions about Myers-Briggs and whether or not it's legit.
It's actually less accurate, right?
Yeah,
it only caught steam because of the fact that it's got a catchy name.
Yeah.
The branding was good.
I think there are much better personalities out there. But
yeah.
But answer some of these questions. Those questions, it's so fun when you come back to it. So we talk so much about the nuts and bolts of how money works, and we talk so little about the attachment to who we are, the things that we've gone through, and the things that we desire. And that is, I think, 90% of the work that's left for people that hasn't been done. And yes, it's crucial to know about contribution limits and compounding returns, and HSAs and the beauty of triple tax advantaged accounts and stuff like that. Those are really important things that we'll keep talking about. But it's more important, I think, to know about that money's ultimately not going to satisfy you, but that it's also one of those really important things, right? It's an element of our life where if we're healthy, then it's going to allow us to be even healthier in other parts of our lives. So, I think working through some of that why behind your money can help you realize how much money you need to be saving in the current moment. And for some people at certain periods in life, it might be a 30 to 40% savings rate, and that makes a lot of sense. And for other people, it might be a 10% savings rate because they've done so well early on. And then also I think it'll help you come to grips with like, what are the things I'm spending on that are moving the needle for my happiness because I've connected it to something deeper that matters in my life. And I think a lot of people just they've left that work left to be is undone. And I think the more that you work on some of that personal stuff, it can actually help you realize what is enough. And it can help you become actually more thrilled. There was a conversation we had with Ken Honda at one point about, and I was like freaking out over this home renovation we were doing, and I was just signing the check. And I just remember having that conversation with him, and it was like about money and happiness. It was about this like kind of Zen approach to money. And I was like, how can you spend this much money on something and not just be like punching yourself in the face while doing it? And I just after that conversation, I was like, you know what? We have said we wanted to do this, and I can make it a miserable experience and beat myself to a pulp over the money that we're spending. Or I can say, man, I'm so thankful that we have this money and that we can do this thing that we've been wanting to do. And it's going to make a big difference in our families' lives. And I think sometimes the hyper frugal person gets in the self-flagellation mindset, and it actually it takes the joy out of even the spending that you are doing that could provide joy because it matters to you.
Yeah, I love Ken Honda because the idea of happy money comes in. He's like, and then happy money goes out. You need to spend it on something you value. And it really relieves some of that stress and anger and anxiety about spending when you're like, happy money comes in, and then your job is to make that happy money going out. Spend it on things you value, on people you value, on services you value that add to your life. And then spending is worthwhile. Matt, I almost feel like the moral of the story is we should be robotic. Like we should look at our net worth every year and say, we can spend this percentage, put it in a separate account, and then have at it and spend on whatever we think will be valuable to us.
I do think that there is something valuable when it comes to being able to proact. So, like you're talking about putting together a budget, looking at the year, figuring out, okay, where did we spend last year? Certainly reviewing that. But I mean, so on one hand, I'm going to say yes, that is important to do, right? Because you need to have a game plan. I think
it can get out of control. I think
it can get out of control,
yeah.
But and you get to a certain point though as well where if you don't really need to look at your finances hardly at all, and you're just kind of like looking, wet thumb up in the air, kind of getting a feel for where the wind's going, that's totally fine as well. But I mean, and I'm still thinking about what you were saying as far as like money and just ultimate happiness and Ken Honda, which is making me think of other things as well. But like it makes me, I heard somebody else talk about just freedom, generally speaking. And we talk about financial freedom and money. And I think the same thing can be applied to the same saying, though, which is that freedom or financial independence it shouldn't be a goal in and of itself, right? It's the things that then allows you to do, right? And so I would say that having a higher net worth, being financially free, it is not intrinsically or inherently valuable. It is instrumentally valuable. It's the things that then allows you to do with the rest of your days here on this earth with the money that you have. And I think that is so important to register, because folks, if they're not thinking through that, David Brooks, he calls it the second mountain. But like whatever it is that you want to pursue, actually, this is the most important thing to me.
Yeah.
The finances and how you set yourself up early on in life oftentimes allows you to then get to that point in your life to where you are finding this more higher levels of just fulfillment, calling, whatever purpose, the different things that you want to pursue with your life.
I think sometimes and this was me too, like in the younger fire crowd or whatever, it's like, oh, any way I can reduce a year or two to hit my financial independence number, even if it means signing myself up for quite a bit of just miserable existence, it's going to be worth it because I'm going to hit my fine number at 42 instead of 45. And that's more years I don't have to work. And I just think that's a short-sighted approach. And I would rather dial back the amount I invested and enjoy my life more in the here and now and hit my fire number a few years later. Because it's just a healthier way to live. And I think we've seen too many people hit their fire number and then they're like, what do I do with my life now? And it almost triggers this existential response because there hasn't been a whole lot more thought beyond hitting some sort of 25x rule number. And ultimately, that's not the goal of life.
So Matt, both you and Joel have lots of kids. And so one thing you've got to be thinking
So
about
many
is
kids.
so many, I mean, just dozens and dozens of kids. So one thing you guys have to be thinking about while you're doing this, watching what we used to call lifestyle creep, but we're being nicer and calling it spending growth now, intentional spending growth. You've got to be thinking, my kids are growing up and seeing me progressively spend more and more on these things. What type of behavior do you think it's healthy to model to kids when it comes to increasing budgets over time?
Yeah, man, that is so tricky because, right, we want the best for our kids. We have more disposable income, more of an ability to spend on our kids and invest in them and the different things that we do together to buy nicer stuff even. But I mean, I think for us, it's having conversations about why it is that we're doing things. And because yeah, there's multiple paths we can get on here, but as far as you're talking about modeling behavior, and I think it's from the outside, anybody can see you spending money in a certain way, and they can either jump to their own conclusions, or maybe they've got no clue why it is that you're spending. They're not even thinking about it. But obviously, we've got more of an impact on our kids than just random strangers, and so I think because of that, talking through the different things that we're spending money on, whether that's a home renovation and saying, hey, this is gonna, like, this is literally, we're talking to architects right now. We're waiting on the next round of drawings to come back from our architects so we can get the ball rolling here. And part of the conversation here is like, hey, this is gonna allow us to have a music room. We're gonna be able to have an actual upright piano up against the wall here. There's gonna be an area here for y'all to be able to craft and to create literal. My wife, she's going to have a studio where she's going to be able to work on ceramics and jewelry and metal design with an exhaust that's going to allow us to be safe and healthy while she works with chemicals, different things like that. And so what we're communicating to them, it's less of a financial sort of conversation. It's more of like, hey, we're talking about art and creativity and what it means, sort of like you're saying, Doc, to who is the person that I am capable of being. And for us, when it comes to spending money on our kids, that's how we're trying to interpret things. How can we invest in our kids now? Not literally invest money for our kids for their future to where they don't have to do anything, but how can we set them up in such a way that's going to just broaden their horizons so that they can see that there's so much that is out there for them to explore and to create and to do and to contribute to in a way without going broke. So that's how I'm thinking about spending money on our kids, and simultaneously, I guess, communicating that to them as we're spending that money.
Sometimes in that conversation, the kids are like, "Oh, but we can afford that, right?" And the truth is, like, I'm willing to have that conversation with them where it's like, we could afford that thing. We could do this thing, but we don't do this thing because we prioritize other things. Or, and sometimes that prioritization too is just, it makes us better humans because sometimes it gets easy to spend money for convenience, for ease. And as a family, we prioritize doing the hard thing sometimes, right, on purpose. So I think those conversations are really important to have with your kids too, because the more money you have, you can use it to kind of like a hammer hitting a nail, and you can just keep spending money on different things, and like, oh, we're gonna upgrade our lifestyle in this way and that way. And I do think resilience is such an important part, and that's one of the things we've struggled with, as like, we have had more money than I had growing up. How do I still instill resilience in a way that isn't, it's not necessary? We could avoid some of the hardship, right? But I think that the self-imposed hardship is an important thing for my kids to learn and for myself to continue to endure, because I don't want to be a weak person, I guess. And so, yeah, I think those conversations remain important, and I'm always willing to enter into that with them. Like, sure, we could put a pool in the backyard, but why do we join the pool down the street? Well, it's way cheaper. We don't have to maintain this thing, and guess what? We get to hang out with friends. You're going to see friends at the pool then too, instead of just our own insular backyard sort of thing. So those are the kind of ongoing conversations that I think matter and drive home the point that, like, money isn't the end all be all. And there are reasons, even if we have the money, to limit our spending because we care about other things more.
Well, Matt and Joel, I wanted to thank you for coming on the show today. I wanted to discuss lifestyle creep because I think in some ways it's a misnomer. What lifestyle creep is when we thoughtlessly spend money and increase that spending over time on things we don't value. But I think a lot of people in your community and my community too, are what we're really talking about is spending growth. And spending growth mainly focuses on things we value, not because you really want that thing, and maybe not even because you really want that experience, but probably because you want to become that person, that family, that community that you want to be. And money is a great tool to help you get there. I want to end the show the way I end every show by asking you what is up next and where can we find you. Matt, first tell us what's going on with the How to Money podcast.
What's going on? We've got 3 episodes every single week, and we would love for Earn and Invest listeners to head over to howtomoney.com/newsletter. I'm really proud of the newsletter that we put together. It's coming out every single week, full of personal finance tidbits, chock full of nuts, as Joel likes to say. But that's what we've got going on.
And Joel, if people have specific questions, is the newsletter the best way to go, or how can they find you on social media?
Oh yeah. Well, we have a vibrant Facebook group, so do check that out as well. And you can always reach out to us directly, howtomoneypod@gmail.com. If you got money questions too, we take them on the show every single week. So Matt he'll respond to every single person that writes in. So even if you just want
we read every single email. We try to get back to all of them, but yeah.
Matt Altmix and Joel Larsgaard from How to Money, thank you so much for coming on Earn and Invest today.
Thanks for having us.
We appreciate it, Doc.
That's a wrap. All right, I keep things going for just a few minutes after show. I have a specific thing I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Does money buy happiness, right? So we all know about the Kahneman study originally that suggested 70,000. Once you go over it, there's not much of an improvement. Then Killingsworth came along and said, no. If you make more money for certain groups of people, it makes them happier. Kahneman and Killingsworth eventually looked at the data together and came up with some of the conclusions you talked about. I don't agree with any of that. Like, so if you look at the Kahneman study, it's like retrospective, looking at these old databases, et cetera. And then if you look at the Killingsworth study, it's like they did these questionnaires that I think they texted or emailed people and they filled them out, multiple times a week for like 10 weeks. And that was it. If you go and look at the Harvard Adult Health Study, probably one of the best studies about what causes happiness in people. They studied people every 2 years for like 70 years. They did interviews with them. They did interviews with their family members, et cetera. Time and time again, what they have found is it's not money, it's not prestige, it's not occupation, it's none of that. That what truly brings happiness is interpersonal connections. And so I think the Harvard study data-wise is so much stronger than the Kahneman-Killingsworth data. I don't even know why we're still having the conversation, but I agree. Those are the studies we all look at, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm missing something, right? Maybe there's like something.
I mean, I think there is some truth to it, right? Because there is like some sort of threshold where, like, if you are making a certain amount, like there is a threshold at which you no longer have to be worried about certain bills, certain things. But
going out for beers with friends doesn't worry you in the same way, right?
But yeah, which leads into the community side of things. But I think it has less to do with the dollar amount and more about margin. Right. And I think at certain dollar amounts, folks are able to have more margin because now they're like, okay, finally, I feel the ability to have more of an emergency fund, more money in the bank, because ultimately, and that's something that we came across recently, is what's leading to happiness, the ability to not stress and fret over every bump in the road. And that comes with margin. That comes with not living paycheck to paycheck. And when folks are able to earn more, and they are able to sock some of that money aside in a high yield savings account, like that's what they're experiencing for their first time. And all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, more money. This is great. I'm so happy. But it's like, well,
it's short lived too.
Yeah.
And that's the hedonic reality of the hedonic treadmill, right? Is like, hey, you get a $50,000 raise, and for like 3, 4, or 5 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, you're like, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And you start to incorporate that into your spending. And pretty soon you're like, when's the next race coming? Because I'm ready for another boost of happiness. I'm ready for another jolt. And I'm so glad the hedonic treadmill is real, because when something really awful happens to you, it means
you habituate back.
Yeah, you habituate back to like a normal, regular life satisfaction that you kind of had before that awful thing happened. But the same thing is true on the upper side. And so I remember thinking like, man, if I made like twice as much money when I was like starting in radio, this is gonna change my life. And then I made twice as much money, and it was helpful. Helped me but only if I think the ways that it accrues to happiness is when you have more margin and when you have more optionality and control. I think people think that when they incorporate that into their spending and they're able to inflate their lifestyle, that is typically where the joy is going to come from, and oftentimes it's not. And I have found that more free time to pursue hobbies and things I care about and relationships with people, that is one of the best things that money's been able
Yeah.
to buy. And it's you don't necessarily need money for some of that, but it
Well,
can be helpful.
yeah. So let me give you two depressing pieces of data. One is the U.S. Times, the
Oh my gosh.
the
Time
Bureau
use
of Labor
survey?
does U.S. Times survey, and they've actually
Yeah.
found that people who have less money and are the lower socioeconomic class tend to have more free time than those who are the middle and upper socioeconomic class. It turns out that wealthy people tend to have less free time. That's one depressing thing. The other depressing thing, so it averages about 5 to 6 hours a day for everybody, with it slightly more for people who have less. The other depressing thing is something called the Easterlin paradox, right? So there's this paradox that they've found that when you take underserved communities, so everyone's poor, everyone has nothing, and you infuse money to those communities, they get a brief bump and then fall back to baseline. Part of the idea behind this actually is it's comparative wealth. So it's
Yes.
not whether you're struggling for the basics, it's whether you're struggling less than your neighbor.
Yeah. I believe that.
And there's
I
studies
think
about people.
And that's depressing.
that's
When-
really
when-
depressing
When
because
people are asked if they would rather have more money or their neighbor have less,
I know.
lots of times they would rather, like, as long as they are better off in comparison to their neighbor, they'll take that
Yeah.
result.
It's-
Like, but if I make 100,000 more and my neighbor makes 200 grand more, then I would rather see them lose 25 grand in salary and me stay put, because it's that relative comparison
Yeah.
of happiness. And that's,
relative.
and then we're obviously living in like a massive comparison age.
Well, I think that's the biggest problem too, is like not getting too far out over your skis. And if you are constantly looking to the next great way that you can spend your money or the next trip, like you're always going to be like at this deficit, right? Like you're always going to not have enough, as opposed to trying to find some sort of equilibrium. Like I swear, I feel like I wake up every day and I'm able to live a life that I can't believe I get to live. Like I get
Yeah.
to, it's like, oh my gosh, I get to wake up in a great house, the healthy, awesome family. I go and work out. I get to
10 servants at his beck and call, you know?
get to hang out with this guy and like quote unquote work all day and create the podcast and our additional content. I get to bike home. Like there are different things that money can't buy. And I think trying to take a more content lifestyle and focusing on the things that matter more, like it keeps, I don't know, it just keeps me from looking ahead and be like, ooh, like where I'm trying to peek around the corner, like what's the next thing that's going to make me, that's going to really turn me on, that's going to get me really pumped and excited. It's less about that and more maybe about finding contentment in the day-to-day, perhaps. I don't know.
And that's where when we were talking about experiences, and that it's the experience hopping, right? It's the, I'm gonna get the next one and then the next one. It's like I'm accruing experiences. And to me, that ultimately isn't terribly satisfying. Like when we go on a beach vacation, it's not because I need the next experience. It's because it's about more time to rest, to have interpersonal connection with people I love and care about the most. And I think that's why I kind of buck against the typical moniker, like experiences are more satisfying than stuff. I
Yeah.
just don't think that's nearly as true as people have made it out to be. And I
Yeah.
think we have treated experiences as a commodity. We've made it into stuff essentially in our current culture.
We
Right?
kind of cheapened it, which because the
Yeah.
argument for experiences is that typically you get to experience those alongside other people, which kind of lends to the whole community thing.
And you get to relive those memories for years after the
Yeah,
fact.
but like you said, it totally has become commoditized, and it's certainly become cheaper. I agree with that
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean, I look at you guys, and so I know you guys as friends over the last 4 or 5 years. You guys started what I appear to be as pretty happy people, but in the time I've known you, you've seemed like you've grown in happiness. Maybe I'm wrong in this, but I've known you long enough and I've kind of watched you. And I would say people watching me would say the same thing. Like I started out as a pretty happy person, but over the last 4 or 5 years, I've kind of become more happy as time goes on. I think a lot of it doesn't have to do with the things or the experiences. It's that you guys are doing the things that you deeply want to do. Like you're becoming
Yeah,
the people
I
you
think
want to
so.
become. And the rest of it is the time at the beach is about being who you want to be, right? The family man, the good friend, those are the things. Could you do it by having a great fun weekend in the city close to home and spending half as much, but with the same people? Probably.
But we do that too.
But you do that too, right? But
Well, and
right. But
I was
it's
just gonna
not it's not very much connected to the money. It's actually connected
Yeah.
to the becoming the person you want to be, which I think a lot of us who've found these kind of second careers or these things that really light us up that actually still pay the bills, like we've been lucky enough to kind of be given that permission to spend our time becoming who we want to be.
And I think that we think that certain things are going to do that for us, and they don't. And it's funny, the things that cost maybe less money but take more thought on the front end are often the things that do pay those dividends. And so, for instance, the thing that I think about every day that makes me so happy, that I walk or bike to work, and it is one of those things where there is no soul sucking commute. I run into neighbors and friends, these spontaneous instances where we talk about movies or pizza or whatever, and those things matter so much to me. Whereas if you're in a car, stuck in traffic, hating your life, even if you're listening to a glorious podcast like this one, there's it's a tougher existence. And I'm like, maybe it costs a little more to live in a place where I feel like I can walk. That might be true in some instances, and sometimes living in the heart of a city, being close to work. But maybe it means you can ditch a car, so maybe it is worth spending a little bit more on the house. But it's those sorts of decisions, I think, that we've made incredibly intentionally, living close to each other, where our kids are best friends and we're best friends and we do a lot of life together. Like that matters a lot and provides a lot of dividends in terms of happiness. But I think often we're thinking about like, how do I get the highest paying job, even if it's a 20-minute more commute every day, and that's 40 more minutes in the car. And ultimately we come home after spending a lot of hours in traffic and we're just worn down, and we're short tempered maybe with the people that we love the most.
Yep.
Because we just feel burnt out. And I think those are the kinds of things that are worth thinking about more. Some of those things are influenced by money. And you actually might be better off ultimately taking a job that pays a little bit less, but that provides you more of that like life satisfaction and
Like
the ability to do more with your hours than that you want to do.
It's like a more sustainable existence. Like you talking about the car thing makes me think about like there's like either same thing. I either bike into our little office here or I walk. I love the days when it's like raining and I'm just walking in the rain with a rain jacket or without a rain jacket.
Sometimes he sings in the rain.
If I'm going home, like I won't even put a rain jacket on. I'm just like walking in the rain, and I freaking love it because I am living a healthy existence that's sustainable, that to me feels healthy. And it's funny because like people who are driving their cars will drive past me, and I've literally had this happen before, and they'll stop and they're like, "Dude, hey, get in the car."
Right, yeah.
And I'm like,
nah.
"No, I don't want to actually." And like, I'm not trying to.
And then he'll have strangers say, "Get in my car," and he'll say, "Okay."
Well, for you, I will. Like, I'm not trying to make a point to them or anything. It's just like truly, like I'm 100% fine walking here in the rain. I got my earbuds in. I'm listening to an audiobook. Like I love what I am doing right now, as opposed to it's all about perspective. It's about perspective.
That is happiness, which you'll read in my book
Yes.
when you guys read it. That's
Yes,
what
we
purpose
will.
is. Purpose
Yeah.
is those small things we do that we love or feel joy in the process of doing them, which is exactly
Yeah.
what you're describing.
I
Heck
can't wait.
yes. Heck
I
yes.
also want to say I always go back to the John Maynard Keynes prediction that we're going to live these lives of leisure, that off in the distance we're going to be working 15-hour work weeks, and we're going to have so much more leisure at our disposal. And the truth is, the size of our cars, the expense of our cars, the size of our homes, all these things have grown exponentially, and so our appetites have kept up with our increase in.
So we'll never live the life of leisure because there's always more to buy.
Yeah, and if we can be content saying like enjoying some of that progress, but then like giving the stiff arm to other elements of it, then I think we can live the best of both worlds, where we're able to, maybe we're not working 15 hours a week, but we have more choice and sway over what it is that we're doing, when we're doing it, how much we're doing it, and then we have more say over the other hours of our day too, because we're not so consumption oriented that we've relegated our freedom to other people, into other people's hands.
All right, I'm going to stop that right here.